What happens when your perfect life is shattered for the world to see? One day, Celeste, a loving billionaire, husband, a Manhattan penthouse, and a baby on the way. The next, she was on the cover of every tabloid, humiliated by her husband's mistress and left with nothing. They thought they had destroyed her. They thought she would disappear. They were wrong. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's the story of how a woman who lost everything, built an empire from the ashes, and became the one who writes the checks. Stick around. You don't want to miss this. The city smelled of success. Or maybe Celeste often thought it just smelled of hot asphalt and roasted cashews, and she had simply learned to associate the scent with victory. From the 48th floor penthouse of the 157 building with Central Park, sprawling beneath her like a picnic blanket for the gods, victory felt like the very air she breathed. At 28, 7 months pregnant with her first child, Celeste, Thorne believed she was living a life meticulously crafted from a dream. Her husband, Theodore Thorne, was the architect of that dream. A tech magnate whose company, Nexus Dynamics, had revolutionized data security. Theodore was a man carved from ambition and designer suits. He had a jawline that could cut glass and a smile that had on their first meeting felt like sunshine. He'd pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a hostile takeover, showering her with Michelin-star dinners at per se impromptu weekend trips to Lake Como on his private jet and a stunning 8-carat cushion-cut diamond that felt heavier than its weight in gold. Celeste hadn't been a nobody when they met. She was a promising art consultant, making a name for herself with a keen eye for undervalued modernists. But Theodore's world was a different stratosphere. It was a world of galas, at the Met of silent knowing nods, from billionaires across a crowded room, of having an Hermes Birkin bag delivered to your door simply because you'd idly mentioned you liked the color. She had fallen in love not just with the man, but with the life he offered, a life that insulated her from the harsh realities she had known growing up in a quiet middle-class suburb. The pregnancy was the final perfect piece. A boy. They had already named him Leo. His nursery was a masterpiece of serene minimalism, with a hand-painted mural of the cosmos on the ceiling and a collection of first-edition children's books lining the shelves. Theodore had been ecstatic, kissing her belly every morning and whispering promises to their unborn son. The first crack in the gilded cage was almost imperceptible. It was a Tuesday. Theodore was supposed to be in Tokyo closing a deal. He called her, his voice crisp and clear, over the satellite connection. "Everything's going perfectly, my love," he'd said. "The board is ecstatic. I'll be home Friday, and I'm bringing you something special." "How are you and Leo doing?" "We miss you," she'd murmured, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. "The city isn't the same without you." Later that evening, scrolling through Instagram, she saw a photo posted by a D-list influencer she followed. The girl was posing on a balcony, a turquoise sea behind her. The caption read, "St. Bart's is healing the soul." It was the background that made Celeste pause. Specifically, the distinctive white and blue striped awning of the hotel balcony. She knew that awning. It was from the Eden Rock, the same hotel they had stayed at for their anniversary. And in the reflection of the girl's oversized sunglasses, almost impossibly small, was a man with Theodore's unmistakable profile, handing her a drink. Her heart did a slow, painful somersault. It had to be a mistake. A trick of the light. Theodore was in Tokyo. She checked his location on the family tracking app. They used a product of his own company, ironically. The GPS dot glowed steadily from the heart of Shinjuku. She told herself she was being hormonal paranoid. Theodore was a master of technology. Of course, his location was where he said it was. He had probably lent his sunglasses to a friend. The explanation was clumsy, but she clung to it like a life raft. When he returned on Friday, bearing a breathtaking Akoya pearl necklace, the doubt was almost washed away by his affectionate embrace and the familiar scent of his Tom Ford cologne. Almost. The second crack was a name, Sienna. Sienna Miller. Not the actress, but a new executive assistant Theodore had hired a few months prior. She was 24, with legs that started on a Tuesday and ended on a Thursday, and a mane of raven black hair. She was also ferociously intelligent, a Wharton graduate, who Theodore had proudly proclaimed was a killer. Celeste had met her once at a company dinner. The girl had a handshake like a vice, and eyes that seemed to assess Celeste's worth in a single, sweeping glance. There was an unnerving confidence about her, a hunger that Celeste found unsettling. Theodore started mentioning her more and more. Sienna streamlined the APAC logistics. Sienna thinks we should acquire a smaller firm. Sienna worked through the weekend to get the pitch deck ready. Her name became a constant, a phantom third person in their marriage. Late-night texts would flash on Theodore's phone, and he'd angle the screen away. Just Sienna finalizing the presentation for tomorrow. He'd say his voice a little too casual. The week of her baby shower, the cracks began to spiderweb across the entire facade of her life. Theodore announced he had to fly to Zurich for an emergency meeting with Swiss bankers. The timing was terrible, and he was profusely apologetic. "I'll move mountains to be back in time for the shower, my love." "I promise," he swore, kissing her deeply. "It's the last thing I want to miss." Celeste tried to be the supportive, understanding wife. His work was demanding, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in her stomach. The baby shower was planned to perfection by her best friend, Chloe. It was to be a lavish affair at the plaza in the terrace room, with a string quartet, a tower of macarons from Ladurée, and gifts from every high-end baby boutique on Madison Avenue. It was meant to be the happiest day of her pregnancy. The morning of the shower, Celeste awoke to a strange silence. Theodore hadn't called. She checked her phone. No texts. The dread was now a living thing coiling in her gut. She sent him a message. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you this afternoon. I love you." No reply. She pushed the feeling down and began to get ready. She chose a flowing, custom-made Carolina Herrera gown in a soft shade of blue, her blonde hair styled in elegant waves. As she fastened the Akoya pearl necklace Theodore had given her, she looked at her reflection. She saw a woman who had everything. As she was about to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. Then another, and another. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked on the first one, a link to the New York Post's infamous Page 6. The headline hit her like a physical blow. Tech Tycoon's Tokyo Trip. Try tryst in St. Bart's. Theodore Thorne caught with mystery. Brunette as pregnant wife waits at home. Her breath hitched. Her fingers trembling scrolled down. And there they were. Not blurry, reflected in sunglasses images, but crystal clear, professionally shot photographs. Theodore and Sienna. On the beach, him rubbing sunscreen on her back. On a yacht, her laughing, draped in his arms, wearing nothing but a tiny string bikini. In a restaurant, him feeding her a piece of mango. His eyes full of an adoration, she had once believed was reserved only for her. And the final soul-crushing photo, a shot through a window into their hotel room at the Eden Rock. Theodore his back to the camera, and Sienna facing it, a triumphant, knowing smirk on her face as she kissed him. It was a pose, a performance for the camera, for her. Her phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous apartment. This wasn't a random paparazzo. This was a targeted strike. The photos were too intimate, too perfectly framed. Sienna hadn't just been with her husband. She had documented the entire affair, compiled it into a portfolio of betrayal, and delivered it to the press on the one day she knew it would inflict the most damage. The Akoya pearls felt like a noose around her neck. She tore the necklace off the string, breaking, sending dozens of perfect, gleaming spheres scattering across the floor, rolling into the shadows like tiny, extinguished stars. The beautiful life she had cherished, the future she had so carefully planned, the very air she breathed, it was all a lie. The gilded cage had burst open, not to free her, but to drop her from a height she never knew existed. And as the city hummed its indifferent tune 48 floors below, Celeste Thorne finally understood the true smell of her world. It wasn't victory, it was ruin. The silence in the penthouse was shattered by the frantic buzzing of her phone. Chloe, her mother, her publicist. The names flashed on the cracked screen, a chorus of digital panic. But Celeste couldn't move. She stood frozen amidst the scattered pearls. The page 6 article burned onto her retinas. Each photo was a fresh stab of betrayal. The way Theodore's hand rested on the small of Sienna's back, the proprietary confidence in his touch. The way Sienna looked directly into the camera in that final shot, a look of pure, unadulterated conquest. It was a declaration of war, and Celeste had just been nuked. A sharp, cramping pain seized her abdomen. Leo. The baby. She gasped, doubling over and bracing herself against a marble-topped console table. The physical pain was a grounding rod pulling her back from the precipice of a full-blown breakdown. She had to think. Not about Theodore, not about Sienna, but about the innocent life inside her. Her publicist, a notoriously ruthless woman named Diana, was the first call she forced herself to answer. Celeste. Thank God. Don't say a word to anyone. Don't look at your phone. Don't look out your window. Diana commanded, her voice a rapid-fire staccato. Diana, don't. Just listen. It's everywhere. TMZ has the yacht photos. The Daily Mail has the hotel shot. It's the lead story on every gossip blog from here to London. They know you're pregnant. They know about the baby shower. The narrative they're spinning is brutal. Celeste looked out the window, then ignoring the advice. On the street below, a small cluster of black cars and people with long-lensed cameras were already gathering like vultures sensing a kill. Her perfect home had become a fishbowl. What do I do? She whispered, her voice sounding alien to her own ears. You go dark. Your doorman is turning everyone away. I'm putting out a statement, a difficult private matter, requesting privacy during this challenging time. It's boilerplate, but it's all we have. And for God's sake, don't call Theodore, but Theodore called her. His name flashed on the screen, and a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over her, so potent it almost made her sick. She let it ring, the sound echoing her thudding heartbeat. He called again and again. Then the texts started. Celeste, please pick up. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything. I was set up. Please, my love. Don't listen to them. Talk to me, my love. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost comical. She wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to smash it into a million pieces. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath and did the only thing she could. She blocked his number. The baby shower at the plaza became a funeral. Chloe had the impossible task of calling the 100+ guests, socialites, artists, business leaders, the crème de la crème of Manhattan society, to tell them the event was cancelled. The official reason was that Celeste wasn't feeling well. The real reason was already the juiciest piece of gossip to hit the city in years. Her friends were the first to abandon ship. The sympathetic texts were few and far between, replaced by a chilling silence. These were women who thrived on status, and she was now radioactive. To be associated with her was to be associated with scandal, with victimhood. In their world, victimhood was a terminal disease. The calls she did receive were from her own family, her frantic mother and bewildered father, their voices laced with a pain that only deepened her own shame. The next 48 hours were a blur of confinement and fear. The paparazzi were a permanent fixture outside. Food was delivered by a trusted security guard. She couldn't eat. Sleep was a distant memory, her mind a torture chamber of replaying images and imagined confrontations. The cramps in her stomach came and went, a terrifying reminder of her baby's vulnerability. The lawyers were the next wave. Theodore's legal team, a phalanx of shark-toothed men in $1,000 suits, sent the first salvo. It wasn't a letter of apology. It was a legal notice, a proposed separation agreement delivered via courier. It was cold, clinical, and utterly devastating. It offered her a generous one-time settlement contingent on her signing a comprehensive NDA that would forbid her from ever speaking about their marriage, Theodore's business, or most pointedly his infidelity. The message was clear: take the money and disappear quietly. They were even trying to take her name. A clause stated she would revert to her maiden name, Celeste Vance, immediately upon signing. They were erasing her, but the most brutal cut came from his family. His mother, Catherine Thorne, a woman who had always treated Celeste with a veneer of chilly politeness, called her Celeste. She began, her voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. I'm sure you can understand this is a deeply distressing time for our family. Theodore has been under immense pressure. This young woman, she took advantage of him. It was a moment of weakness. Celeste's jaw tightened. A moment, Catherine, there are dozens of photos. This was an affair, an indiscretion, Catherine corrected her, one that has been regrettably and maliciously made public. What's important now is protecting the family name and nexus dynamics. Theodore has investors to answer to. This spectacle you are creating is making things very difficult. Spectacle. I am creating. The audacity stole her breath. I'm the one on the cover of the Post. I'm the one trapped in my home, pregnant and humiliated. And what would you have us do? My son made a mistake. He is willing to provide for you. You would be wise to accept his offer and allow us all to move on with a modicum of dignity. Dignity. The word was a slap in the face. They weren't just siding with him. They were blaming her for the public fallout. She was an inconvenient problem to be managed and discarded. That was the moment the grief curdling inside her finally hardened into something else. Something cold and hard and sharp. A diamond of pure fury. She knew she couldn't stay in the penthouse. It was his home, not hers. Every surface, every object was tainted. His clothes hung in the closet. His books were on the nightstand. His scent lingered in the air. It was a mausoleum of a dead marriage. She packed one suitcase, not the designer clothes or the gifted jewelry, but the few things that were truly hers. Old paperbacks from college, a framed photo of her parents, the simple gold locket her grandmother had left her. She took the baby's things, the tiny onesies, the soft blankets, the first edition copy of Goodnight Moon. As she was about to leave, she did one last thing. She walked into Theodore's pristine, minimalist office. On his desk was a framed photo from their wedding day. They were both laughing, caught in a moment of what she had believed was pure joy. She picked it up, looked at the smiling face of the man who had shattered her world, and placed it face down on the desk. She had arranged for a private car service to take her away in the middle of the night, using a service entrance to evade the press. As the car pulled away from the curb, she took one last look at the glittering tower that had been her home. It looked less like a beacon of success now, and more like a tombstone. She had the driver take her to the Carlisle Hotel. It was an anonymous, temporary refuge. It was there in a suite paid for with the last vestiges of her own money that she finally agreed to see him. She needed to look him in the eye. She needed to hear the lies from his own mouth. He arrived looking haggard, but still impeccably dressed. He tried to embrace her. She flinched back as if he were on fire. "Celeste, thank you for seeing me." He started, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed sincerity. "Don't," she said, her own voice dangerously calm. "Don't you dare act like this is some sort of civilized discussion. You have 60 seconds to say whatever it is you think you need to say before I have you removed." His face fell. The practiced contrition gave way to frustration. "This isn't my fault. Sienna leaked those photos. She was trying to extort me. She's unhinged. You slept with her, Theodore. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake," he insisted, his voice rising. "It meant nothing. You and the baby are my life. You have to believe me." She stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Not the charming tech titan, but a weak, cowardly man who couldn't even own his own betrayal. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. A mistake, she repeated the words, tasting like poison. You call a months-long affair a mistake. You call flying your mistress to St. Bart's while telling your pregnant wife you're in Tokyo a mistake, no, Theodore. A mistake is when you grab the wrong coat. This was a series of choices. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to humiliate me. And Sienna, she didn't just leak photos. She sent them to the press on the morning of my baby shower. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did you. You just never thought you'd have to face the consequences. She walked over to the door and opened it. Your 60 seconds are up. He looked stunned, as if he genuinely believed he could talk his way out of it. Celeste, don't do this. Think of Leo. Think of our family. I am thinking of my child, she said, her voice like ice. And he will not be raised by a liar and a coward. There is no our family anymore. You burned it to the ground. Now get out. He stared at her, his expression shifting from desperation to a cold, hard anger. It was the look of a man whose power had been challenged. You'll regret this, Celeste. You have no idea what you're walking away from. No, she said, meeting his gaze without blinking. I'm not walking away from anything. I'm walking toward something better, something real. After he left, she collapsed onto the bed, the fury finally giving way to a wave of soul-crushing despair. He was right about one thing. She had no idea what she was doing or where she was going. She had lost her husband, her home, her friends, her financial security, her name. She had lost everything. Everything except the tiny, persistent flutter of life within her. And in the crushing darkness of that hotel room, that tiny flutter was the only thing left to hold on to. The Carlisle Hotel, with its Art Deco elegance and hushed corridors, was meant to be a sanctuary, but it felt like a gilded prison. Celeste existed in the oppressive silence of Suite 14B, a ghost-haunting rooms paid for with the dwindling remnants of her former life. For a week, she moved through a fog of grief, the city's symphony of shens and horns, a distant, muffled soundtrack to her internal collapse. She'd order room service, poached salmon, wild rice. Things a healthy pregnant woman should eat only to stare at it until it grew cold. Her appetite annihilated by a knot of anxiety lodged permanently in her throat. The television droned on, a flickering cyclops. She refused to watch, terrified of seeing her own shattered life repackaged as a segment between a weather forecast and a celebrity cooking show. The outside world pressed in relentlessly. Paparazzi photos of her, a shadowy figure slipping into the hotel's side entrance, were splashed across the internet, her face a mask of strain. The headlines were a form of public torture, jilted wife in hiding. Thorns, plots revenge. She had been reduced from a person to a caricature, her trauma a commodity to be consumed by strangers. Theodore's legal team was a pack of well-dressed wolves. They didn't call. They communicated through her lawyer, Helen, with a series of escalatingly hostile documents. The initial separation agreement was followed by revised offers, each one slightly less generous. Each word a carefully calibrated threat. The message was brutally clear. Her compliance had a shelf life, and its value was depreciating with every news cycle. "He wants to bleed you out, Celeste," Helen said, her voice pragmatic and devoid of pity, which Celeste was strangely grateful for. "He has inexhaustible resources. He can file motions, demand depositions, and drag this through the courts for years. By the time it's over, the baby will be in kindergarten, and you'll be emotionally and financially bankrupt." "So I should take it," Celeste whispered, clutching a plush hotel cushion to her swollen belly. "I should sign a paper that says he did nothing wrong, and I'll never speak of it. I'm saying you should consider what a war will cost you," Helen countered. "Not in dollars, but in peace of mind. He's betting you don't have the stomach for it." Helen was right. The thought of a public spectacle, of having her private pain dissected by lawyers and reported on by tabloids, was physically nauseating. She imagined being cross-examined, forced to recount the lies to have the St. Bart's photos entered as evidence. But the alternative, accepting their blood money, signing an NDA that would permanently gag her, felt like letting them win. It was the final soul-crushing act of erasure. The decision came to her in the dead of night during that quiet, lonely hour before dawn, when the city holds its breath. She couldn't stay in New York. The city was a monument to her dead marriage. Every corner held a memory. The bench in Central Park, where he proposed the Italian restaurant in the West Village, where they had their first date, the soaring glass facade of the 157 building, a constant glittering reminder of the life she had been thrown from. To heal, she had to leave the graveyard. She called her parents, her voice breaking on the first syllable. They didn't offer platitudes or ask for details they already knew from the news. Her father's voice was steady, a lighthouse in her storm. "We're here, Ellie. Just come home." Home. The word itself felt both alien and essential. Leaving New York felt like a surrender, an admission of defeat. She was a refugee fleeing a war zone, and her childhood home in a leafy Connecticut suburb was the only embassy that would grant her asylum. She packed her single suitcase with the artifacts of her true self. Not the Chanel jackets or the Manolo Blahniks, but the things that had belonged to Celeste Vance. Frayed paperbacks from her college literature courses, a worn cashmere sweater she'd had for a decade, the simple gold locket from her grandmother. She carefully folded the tiny baby clothes, the soft onesies and miniature socks, a tangible promise of a future that had to be better than this present. Her final act in the city was to fire her publicist and her lawyer. She couldn't afford them, but more than that, she couldn't stand being managed anymore. She was done with strategy and statements. She just needed to survive. Her father picked her up from the train station in his aging Volvo. Its familiar scent of old leather and dog hair, a jarring contrast to the chauffeured Escalades of her recent past. As they drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets, the sheer velocity of her fall was staggering. She had gone from a penthouse overlooking the world to her childhood bedroom with its faded floral wallpaper and a lingering scent of the bubblegum perfume she'd worn as a teenager. The walk-in closet that once housed a fortune in couture was now a cramped space holding a suitcase and a box of maternity wear. Her parents were magnificent in their quiet support. Her mother, a retired nurse, fussed over her, making her favorite soups and ensuring she took her prenatal vitamins, her love, a gentle, practical force. Her father, a history professor, would sit with her in the evenings, not pressing her to talk, but simply being present, a silent, steady anchor. They never said, "I told you so," but she saw the pain and worry etched in the lines around their eyes. She had flown so high, and they were terrified the fall had broken her for good. The last 2 months of her pregnancy were a crucible. Grief was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe, hard to move. Some days she couldn't get out of bed, pinned down by the weight of her failure. Anger was a wildfire, a white-hot rage that she channeled into long, solitary walks through the woods behind her parents' house, her footsteps crunching on fallen leaves as she replayed every betrayal in her mind. She gave birth on a grey, rainy Tuesday in October. The labor was long and agonizing, a 24-hour battle that felt like a physical exorcism of the trauma she had endured. The sterile, impersonal environment of the local community hospital was a universe away from the lavish birthing suite at Mount Sinai that Theodore had booked with its concierge service and sweeping city views. Here the nurses were overworked, the lights were fluorescent, and her only support system was her mother holding her hand and whispering encouragement through every contraction. And then, after an eternity of pain, it was over. The world, which had been a cacophony of beeping machines and her own ragged screams, fell utterly silent. The nurse laid a tiny, squirming, red-faced creature on her chest. A daughter. Her daughter. With a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages, she was the most beautiful thing Celeste had ever seen. She looked at this perfect, innocent being, a child born of so much love and so much pain, and a fierce, primal wave of purpose washed over her, cleansing her of the last vestiges of victimhood. She was not just Celeste Vance anymore. She was a mother. She was a fortress. She named her Phoenix. Life as a new single mother was a brutal, beautiful, relentless marathon. The nights were a blurry cycle of 2-hour naps, punctuated by feedings, changings, and pacing the floor with a crying baby. The days were a lonely struggle to feel human. Her body was a landscape she no longer recognized, her hormones a chaotic storm. Her old life, with its lunches at Balthazar and galas at the Met, felt like a movie she had once seen about someone else. The spark ignited on a particularly bleak afternoon, 3 months later. Phoenix was colicky. Celeste hadn't showered, and her uniform was a milk-stained sweatshirt. Her hands were raw and cracked from constant washing. The expensive organic nipple cream a friend had sent was gone. The drugstore calming bath oil she'd bought smelled cloying and synthetic. She looked around the nursery, at the mountain of baby products, gifts from the disastrous shower items she'd bought in a hormonal panic. So much of it was useless plastic junk. The must-have gadgets were complicated and ugly. The lotions and creams were filled with chemicals she couldn't pronounce. There was an overwhelming focus on the baby, a tiny, resilient creature who mostly just needed to be held and fed. But there was nothing for the mother. Nothing for the woman who was bleeding and healing and weeping from exhaustion, her entire identity fractured and reformed in the crucible of childbirth. An idea faint at first, then insistent, began to burn through the fog of her exhaustion. What if there was something that cared for the mother? A curated experience, a box delivered to her door, filled with things that were both genuinely useful and deeply luxurious. Not more plastic toys, but things that would restore her, nurture her, make her feel seen. High-end, truly organic skincare for her ravaged skin. A pair of impossibly soft cashmere socks for shuffling around at 3 a.m. Delicious, nutrient-dense lactation cookies that didn't taste like cardboard. A beautiful washable silk robe to replace the stained sweatshirt. It would be a box of survival, but also a box of indulgence. A lifeline. A reminder that she still mattered. With Phoenix asleep in a sling against her chest, she grabbed a dusty notebook from her old desk and began to scribble, the pen flying across the page. The grief and anger that had been her fuel for months began to transmute into a new, more powerful energy ambition. She dove into research with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. Her days were spent nursing Phoenix, while her nights were spent falling down internet rabbit holes, discovering small female-founded businesses making exquisite, non-toxic products. She rediscovered her old self, the art consultant, with an impeccable eye for quality branding and aesthetics. It was a skill set Theodore hadn't been able to take from her. On the floor of her childhood bedroom, surrounded by baby toys and research notes, she mapped out a business plan. She would call it Aura, for the light and energy that motherhood depleted and that she so desperately wanted to restore. Using the last of her savings, she built a simple, elegant website herself. She crafted coolful, passionate emails to the small brands she admired, telling her story, not as a victim, but as a mother who saw a need. Some ignored her, but many, hearing the authenticity in her voice, agreed to partner with her. Her parents' garage, once home to lawn equipment and Christmas decorations, became her fulfillment center. She packed the first 20 boxes herself, her hands aching, writing a personal handwritten note for each one. After the cost of products and shipping, she barely broke even. The doubt was a creeping poison. "What are you doing?" "This is a fantasy. You should have taken the money." Then the emails started to arrive. "Your box came today and I sat on the floor and cried. I felt seen for the first time in months. That face oil is a miracle. My husband said, I look like I've actually slept. From one mother to another, thank you. Just thank you. Each message was a validation, a proof point that her pain was not hers alone. It was the shared unspoken story of countless women. She wasn't just selling things in a box. She was selling recognition. She reinvested every single dollar. The next month, she sold 50 boxes. The month after that, 200. Then her old friend Chloe called, weeping, after receiving a box, apologizing for her cowardice and calling the idea brilliant. That was the moment Celeste knew. The ashes of her old life had provided the most fertile ground she could have ever imagined. Something new was growing, something fierce and beautiful, and it was entirely her own. The growth of Aura was not a gradual incline. It was a vertical launch, a phenomenon that would later be dissected in business journals and podcasts. The tipping point arrived on a Tuesday, 6 months after the first 20 boxes had been shipped from her parents' garage. Celeste was on the floor of her small rented office space building a flat-pack IKEA bookshelf while Phoenix babbled in her playpen when her phone began to buzz incessantly. It was Chloe. "Have you seen it?" Chloe shrieked, her voice a mixture of glee and panic. "Have you seen what Jessica Sterling just posted?" Celeste's heart seized. Jessica Sterling was not just an actress. She was a cultural icon, an Oscar winner, renowned for her raw, unfiltered approach to life, including her recent, highly public journey into motherhood. Celeste's fingers trembled as she navigated to Instagram. And there it was, a 10-minute unscripted video from Jessica sitting in her sun-drenched kitchen, looking beautifully exhausted. In front of her was an open Aura box. She wasn't performing. With tears welling in her eyes, she spoke directly to her 50 million followers about the crushing isolation of the 4th trimester, the feeling of being invisible while her entire world revolved around her newborn. "You feel like a ghost in your own life," she said, her voice cracking. "And then this shows up. I don't know who you are, Celeste Vance, but this box, it felt like a hug from a sister. It was someone seeing me." She held up the Sanctuary face oil, calling it liquid sleep. The impact was instantaneous and seismic. Celeste watched her website's real-time traffic analytics, a feature she had recently become obsessed with. The number usually hovering around 40 or 50 visitors skyrocketed. 1,000, 10,000, 50,000. Then the screen went blank. A fatal error message appeared. The site had crashed. Her phone was now a vibrating brick of notifications, emails, Instagram tags, texts from numbers she didn't recognize. It was a digital tidal wave, and she was at its epicenter. For a full minute, she was paralyzed by pure terror. This was too big. Too fast. She was a woman with a baby and a square space sight. Then looking at Phoenix, who was now staring at her with wide, curious eyes, the terror was eclipsed by a surge of electrifying purpose. This was it. It took her web host 4 hours to get the site back online. By then, a backlog of over 10,000 orders had accumulated. The garage was obsolete. Her savings were insufficient. This was a new league, and she had to step up to play. The next few months were a masterclass in controlled chaos, armed with a meticulously researched business plan and a viral success story. She walked into a bank and secured a small business loan that felt to her like an astronomical sum. She leased a 15,000-square-foot warehouse, the empty cavernous space echoing with both her ambition and her anxiety. She hired her first employees not from corporate recruiting pools, but from local mothers' groups. They were women like her, smart, capable, and overlooked by a traditional workforce that had no room for the realities of motherhood. Their team meetings were often punctuated by the sounds of babies cooing or toddlers demanding snacks, but they were the most fiercely dedicated and resourceful team she could have ever imagined. The next 2 years were a blur of 18-hour days. Celeste was the soul and engine of the company. She was in the warehouse at dawn, overseeing fulfillment, and on calls with suppliers in Asia late at night. She was the final eye on every design, the author of every heartfelt blog post. She was fueled by lukewarm coffee adrenaline and the quiet moments she stole to rock Phoenix, to sleep in a travel crib she'd set up in the corner of her glass-walled office. She was building an empire, one box at a time. She expanded the line with an almost psychic understanding of her customers' needs, because they were her own. She remembered the panic of packing a hospital bag, so she created the Go Bag box, perfectly curated with everything a new mother might forget. She remembered the gut-wrenching anxiety of returning to work, so she designed the 4th trimester and beyond box with products aimed at easing the transition. She launched Aura's own product line, beginning with the now legendary Sanctuary face oil. She collaborated with a female biochemist, insisting on formulas that were ruthlessly effective, yet gentle enough for the most sensitive hormonal skin. Aura became more than a brand. It was a movement. The company's blog, The 4th Trimester, became a digital sanctuary, featuring raw, unvarnished essays from women about postpartum depression, changing bodies, and the secret, unspoken joys and sorrows of motherhood. Celeste had given a voice to the invisible, and in doing so had cultivated a bond of trust with her customers that legacy brands could only dream of. She was featured in Fast Company and Forbes' 30 Under 30. The narrative had been rewritten. She was no longer Theodore Thorne's jilted wife. She was Celeste Vance, the visionary founder and CEO of Aura. The time came to scale globally. She needed capital, and she set her sights on the biggest prize, Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley. She managed to secure a meeting with a top-tier venture capital firm, a notoriously tough room of partners known for eviscerating founders. She walked into their sterile, intimidating boardroom, the only woman at a table of 10 men in identical navy blazers. They looked at her with polite, dismissive smiles, the kind reserved for a novelty act. She could almost hear their thoughts. A Mommy and Me subscription box. Cute. Celeste dressed in a sharp, cream-colored suit from the Row. Her demeanor utterly serene, didn't flinch. She laid out her vision, not with emotional appeals, but with cold, hard data. She presented charts on the untapped economic power of mothers, on the rise of the personal wellness industry, on the lifetime value of a customer acquired during a period of profound life change. One of the partners, a man named Blevins, who had the predatory air of a hawk, leaned back. "It's a niche market, Ms. Vance, a very emotional one. How do you scale sentiment?" Celeste met his gaze. "You see a niche market. I see half the population. You see sentiment as a weakness. I see it as our moat. The sentiment you're talking about is the fiercest brand loyalty on the planet. When you solve a real painful problem for a woman during the most vulnerable period of her life, you don't just get a customer. You get an evangelist for life. Aura will be with her from her first pregnancy test to her first hot flash. We are building a lifelong wellness platform, and the subscription box is just our entry point." She concluded, her voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. Gentlemen, you have spent your careers funding companies that connect us to our devices. I'm building a company that reconnects women to themselves. Which do you think is a more enduring business? She walked out with a $50 million investment at a valuation that stunned the industry. Aura was officially a unicorn. With the new capital, the company went into hyperdrive. She opened offices in London and Sydney, poaching top talent from the very beauty and tech conglomerates that had once ignored her. She hired Chloe to run the Aura Foundation, a philanthropic arm dedicated to supporting maternal health initiatives in underserved communities, a way of institutionalizing the hug from a sister that had started it all. And then, just as she was overseeing the final plans for the company's new state-of-the-art headquarters, the past came knocking. It arrived in a sterile FedEx envelope, a letter from Theodore's lawyers. The same firm, but their tone had changed from arrogant dismissal to predatory suggestion. He was suddenly deeply concerned about Phoenix's upbringing. He was petitioning for joint custody. A separate clause hinted at a financial audit of Aura, positing that its intellectual property had been conceived while they were still legally married, which they argued might entitle him to a significant share of its value. It was a transparent, pathetic shakedown. The business press had been whispering about Theodore for months. Nexus Dynamics was bleeding value mired in federal investigations over data privacy scandals. Sienna had long since departed, taking a hefty chunk of his fortune with her in a sealed settlement. Theodore was a wounded animal, and seeing Aura's meteoric rise, he smelled a lifeline. The old Celeste would have been consumed by a storm of anxiety and fear. The new Celeste felt a strange, cold calm. She read the letter twice, then slid it across the desk to her lawyer, Helen. "He's a parasite," Helen said, her voice tight with disgust. "We can bury him. Drag him through a discovery process that will make his hair fall out." Celeste stared out the window, her gaze fixed on the city skyline. "No," she said finally. "A public fight is what he wants. It makes him relevant again. It puts my name and his in the same headline. We're not going to fight him in the mud. We're going to drown him in the ocean." She agreed to a meeting. Not at a neutral law office, but at her headquarters, the newly renovated textile mill she had transformed into a light-drenched biophilic campus. It was a cathedral of her own making. She made him wait for 20 minutes in the lobby, a soaring atrium where a massive Jenny Holzer LED installation scrolled messages of female empowerment. When a young assistant finally showed him into her corner office, the power inversion was absolute. The space was twice the size of his old office at Nexus, with panoramic views of the city she now dominated. She remained seated behind her vast, minimalist desk, a single, perfect white orchid in a vase, its only adornment. Behind her, framed in museum-quality glass, was Phoenix's latest finger painting, a chaotic, joyful explosion of color. He looked smaller than she remembered. The bespoke suit couldn't hide the weariness in his eyes or the slight tremor in his hand. He attempted the old charming smile, but it was a hollow, ghastly imitation. "Celeste, you look incredible." He began, his voice raspy. "This place, it's really something." "Thank you, Theodore," she said, her tone cool and clinical. "You have 5 minutes. What do you want?" He launched into a poorly rehearsed monologue about his rights as a father, his profound regret, his burning desire to know the daughter he had never met. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. She let him finish, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "Let's not waste each other's time with fiction," she said, her voice dangerously soft. You have no interest in Phoenix. You are interested in my balance sheet. You ignored your daughter's existence for nearly 5 years. Not a card, not a gift, not an email. Your paternal instincts were miraculously awakened on the exact day that Forbes published my estimated net worth. Your petition isn't about custody. It's an extortion attempt, and frankly, it's beneath you even for you. He visibly flinched, color draining from his face. That's not, here is what is going to happen, she interrupted, her voice gaining a diamond-hard edge. You are going to withdraw your petition this afternoon. You will sign a comprehensive agreement drafted by my lawyers, forfeiting any and all current or future claims to Aura, its parent companies, or any of my personal assets in perpetuity throughout the known universe. In return, I will continue to do what I have always done, provide a wonderful life for my daughter. The trust I established for her on the day of her birth will remain under my sole control. You will be permitted 4 supervised visits per year. These visits will take place at a location of my choosing and will last for no more than 1 hour. If you refuse, or if you ever try a stunt like this again, I will not see you in family court. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I will countersue you for malicious prosecution, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My legal team, which I assure you is an order of magnitude more lethal than the one you can currently afford, will depose every person you have ever worked with, slept with, or lied to. We will make the St. Bart's scandal feel like a quaint prologue to the public evisceration that will follow. Your company is already a house of cards, Theodore. All it needs is one final gust of wind. She stood up, then a silent, final dismissal. You built your empire on a foundation of lies. I built mine on the truth of women's lives. Whose kingdom do you think will last? He stared at her, utterly broken. He saw no ghost of the weeping, pregnant girl he had cast aside. In her place stood a queen serene and absolute in the heart of the world she had conceived and built from the rubble of his betrayal. He gave a single jerky nod, turned and walked out of her office, a man retreating from a battle he had lost before it had even begun. A year later, Aura went public. The IPO was the largest in the history of any female-founded company. As Celeste stood on the iconic balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, Phoenix, holding tightly to her hand, confetti raining down on the cheering crowd below, she felt a profound sense of peace. The city smelled of success, and this time she knew with every fiber of her being that it was hers. She had not sought revenge. She had sought to build. She had lost everything, and in doing so, had created a universe of her own. Celeste Vance's journey shows us that sometimes hitting rock bottom is the perfect foundation to build an empire. She transformed the deepest betrayal into a billion-dollar purpose, not by seeking revenge, but by building something better. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. She didn't just get even. She got everything entirely on her own terms. What did you find most inspiring about Celeste's comeback? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe in the power of resilience and want more stories of incredible triumphs against all odds, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's coming next.